Hello, my name is Dorit Braun. Thank you for inviting my testimony. During the first lockdown in the United Kingdom in 2020, I began to research my family tree. Some months later, I was contacted by Agnieszka because I'm a descendant of the Jewish community of Tremessen. This was a surprise to me. I knew that my great-grandmother, Paula Fuchs, née Lowenthal, was born there, but I'd really only heard about her living in Stettin and then Berlin. Through Agnieszka, I discovered there were very many more members of my Tremessen family, and their fate was heartbreaking. My middle name is Paula, and I'm named for my great-grandmother. She perished in Tremessen on the 27th of December 1942. She was deported there from Berlin on the 25th of August 1942. She was 77. My mother adored her grandmother Paula, and she told me all about her. I knew she had died in Tremessen. I knew she'd paid for my mother and her mother to travel from Trieste to Haifa, first class. She'd accompanied them to Trieste, but refused to go to Palestine because she was an old lady, fully assimilated, and she could not believe the Nazis would pay her any attention. I didn't know that Paula had a brother called Leo Lowenthal, or a sister-in-law, Margareta Lowenthal, or a niece, Hannah. I didn't know she had aunts, uncles, cousins, nieces and nephews who remained in Tremessen. I didn't know that 18 of her relatives had perished. Here are their names and their fates. I name them to honour them, to acknowledge that they lived, they loved, they mattered. Leo was executed on the 18th of January 41 in Berlin. He was 62. His wife Margareta died on the 18th of April 1940 in Lubin. She was 47. Paula's aunt Julie Strelitz died on the 24th of May 41. She was 77. Her cousin Flora Schlesinger, née Lowenthal, was murdered in Treblinka in 1942. She was 74. Flora's son Arthur Schlesinger was murdered in Auschwitz in 42. He was 52. His wife Kate was murdered in Auschwitz in 42, aged 44. Flora's sister, Paula's cousin Anna Abraham, née Lowenthal, was murdered in 1942, aged 64. Her husband Ferdinand Abraham was murdered in 1942 in Riga. He was 66. Ferdinand's brother, Sigismund Abraham, perished in the Warsaw Ghetto. He was in his 70s. His children perished too. His daughter, Gerta Sylvia Lesser, née Abraham, was murdered in Auschwitz in June 1942, aged 35. His son, Dr. Felix Abraham, was murdered in November 1942 in Auschwitz, aged 41. Felix's wife, Ava Abraham, was murdered in Berlin in 1943. Flora and Anna's sister and Paula's cousin, Jenny Lazarus, née Lowenthal, perished on the 8th of November 1942 in Tremessen. She was 68. I often wonder if Jenny and Paula knew each other was in Tremessen. Another sister, Regina Schwerschenzer, née Lowenthal, was murdered in approximately 1939, aged 63, along with her husband Willie, aged about 65. Their daughter Lucy was murdered in Auschwitz in about 44. She was 41. Her husband Georg Ornstein was murdered in Auschwitz on the 28th of March 1943. He was 52. Their son Kurt was murdered in Auschwitz in about 44. He was about 15. Sigismund and Ferdinand Abraham's brother Karl Josef Abraham was murdered on the 6th of February 1943 in Berlin, aged 64. Agnieszka showed me photos of the tenement building where my great-grandmother Paula was born. She showed me photos of the family shop, which was confiscated by the Nazis in 1939. She has told me that the Jewish cemetery is in ruins, and that she did not learn about the Jewish residents of the town or their fate when she was at school. Many years ago, in the 1960s, I watched an episode of a television detective story with my mother. They were chasing a neo-Nazi. They visited his flat and they found a cache of photos and Nazi memorabilia. The photos were shown on the screen. One featured a pile of bones. My mother collapsed on the floor, sobbing. That could be your great-grandmother's bones on that heap. In England, after the Brexit vote, I decided to apply for German citizenship. I'm entitled to this through my mother, and my European identity matters to me. At the time, I was increasingly alarmed at overt anti-Semitism in Britain, on the left as well as on the right, and I'm horribly aware of the difficult decisions my family had to make. How does anyone decide when it is time to flee? Before I began to research my family tree, I believed I might uncover some 15 or so Holocaust deaths. I've uncovered 148, and there are still more, as yet unaccounted for. I now understand that the scale of this genocide was something that my parents' and grandparents' generation were simply too traumatized to talk about. And I look at events around the world where people are killed, imprisoned, attacked, jailed, just for being who they are, with a new terror and horror. We must learn about our pasts, confront them, come to terms with the horrors. If we do not, we risk history repeating itself. Thank you.